Thanks for joining.
I'm Reese.
I'm Joe. You're listening to Poly by Nature,
the podcast where you can have your cake and eat it too. All right, welcome back to another episode of Poly by Nature. Your hosts here, Joe and Reese. We have a good episode today. We are discussing the topic of stored trauma and specifically releasing that trauma and how that trauma relates to your relationships and intimacy and non-monogamous relationships. So to help us get into the topic, explain some things, we have a relationship expert with us today. She is a dance therapist and her name is Orit Krug. You want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Joe and Reese, for having me on. My name is Orit Krug. I'm a board certified dance movement therapist. Basically what that means is I help people access trauma memories from inside their bodies, and I help them process and release them through movement. I specifically work with people in all types of relationships, monogamous and non-monogamous, who have tried to heal a lot of their past through different kinds of therapies and still feel really stuck, like something's not clicking or their minds and their bodies are still disconnected. So even though they know how they want to be a healthier partner or be less jealous, or just overall feel more secure in themselves, they are still going forward with sabotaging their relationships or not being able to have the depth and intimacy that they really want in relationships. So that is mainly how I help people through dance therapy. And I am also partnered and poly, and I have a 3-year-old toddler who's a lot, but amazing too.
How do we know if our trauma affects us? How do we even know that we have issues that are actually related to our trauma?
That's a great question. It's usually by the severity or intensity of which you react to relationship issues. So, of course, in relationships, there are always going to be disagreements, not always, but eventually or here and there are disagreements or there's tension or triggers even. And it's normal for us to be upset or jealous or insecure in any relationship here and now, depending on what's going on. But if the way that you are feeling inside of your body and the way that you're responding in your relationship is with so much intensity, like impulsively reacting, not being able to control the way you react. And a lot of times my clients will end up saying they regret that. Like, how could I have done that again? So it's almost like something else takes over you. And even though you probably know better or you want to respond differently, it's like the trauma that is stored in your body hijacks your nervous system and you're reacting before you can even really have a say in the way you're responding.
Is this a stored trauma from like a childhood past that we're referring to? Is this trauma relegated to something that's more recent? When we say trauma, maybe I just need to understand, like, what kind of trauma are we kind of referring to that could be helped with what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think that comes up a lot. Like people will say, I don't know if I have trauma, or I had a great childhood and nothing particularly terrible has happened to me, yet I'm still experiencing these issues. So there's such a big spectrum, and most people are aware of quote unquote big traumas that happen, whether it's a car accident or sexual trauma or abuse or emotional abuse, neglect, whether that's from your parents growing up or your caregivers or in adult relationships. But there's also more sneaky traumas, I guess we can call them. Let's say you grew up in a family with 5 other siblings and your parents could not really give you the attention that you truly needed as a child to develop healthy patterns. We could call that mild neglect, maybe moderate neglect, depending on the situation. And so that's something that's not quite obvious. Or maybe you grew up with a caregiver who was depressed all the time and they could not attune to you emotionally. And so that is not such an obvious in your face trauma, but it's just like every day you didn't really feel met. You didn't feel your emotional needs met, and it leaves an imprint. And that is what trauma is. It's not as much about the specific details of the situation that led to trauma, even though those can be important. It's how it makes an imprint on your nervous system, because two people could experience the same exact situation. I mean, we see this in siblings, pretty much the same exact situation. One feels the effects of trauma, and one is super healthy and didn't feel impacted. So if whatever you experienced, whether it was a big obvious trauma or something like getting bullied in school every day, if it leaves your nervous system in a hyper vigilant state and has hardwired you to be overprotective and fearful of like a lot of things around you, then you know that whatever you experience has left trauma in your system.
Now, some people don't even remember their trauma. Is that still something that can affect you?
So there's the first 2 years of our lives where we don't have much of a verbal vocabulary. And that is also the time in our lives where we are forming our attachment patterns. And it's like, it's just such an important time of our lives where we learn about the world and how relationships work. And that is primarily a pre-verbal period. So the way that, a parent might aggressively pick up their child when they're angry, or advance forcefully towards them, or just ignore and turn around and put their, face their back, and whatever it is, a lot of this stuff happens non-verbally. And so if we're experiencing it non-verbally and we don't have the words to store those memories, that's going to be stored in our bodies in that way, where it's like we remember the sensations that we felt, and we remember the way that people interacted with us. We just didn't store those memories in words. We can absolutely work through that trauma. That's the core of what I do. I work with people who have been in decades of traditional talk therapy, and they're like, I'm talked out. I don't understand. There's still all this trauma, and we work together, and all of a sudden they're remembering things in their bodies that they never got to. They never remembered in all those years of therapy. I can give an example. So I was working with one woman she was working with me because she couldn't shake the belief that her partner was going to be abusive to her, even though he never was, because she grew up witnessing domestic violence with her parents. And so even though her mind was like, okay, he's not going to be abusive, it would just take the, subtle look on his face or the way that he used his voice that would trigger her and make her go on defense and freeze, which is one of the survival responses that our nervous systems do when we have trauma. And we were working together one time in session, and we were moving more with more strength and force. So I was just guiding her to move with more power. And moving more power in her body brought up this memory that she wasn't able to access in all those years of therapy. And it was her standing between her parents, her father holding a gun towards her mother.
Wow.
Yeah. Like that movement of being strong, it somehow triggered that memory of like basically being her mother's bodyguard. And it was incredible. She remembered it, and it just released for her.
Wow. I've actually grew up with witnessing abuse in my household. So when me and Joey got together, I completely expected that our interactions would result in some type of physical, abuse, because that's what I grew up with and that's what I witnessed. So, you know, I would expect it during an argument. It's kind of weird. Like I would have it in my head, like, okay, is this that moment where something happens? Okay, he's getting really angry. Is this where it's gonna go? And it never did. And even though it never did, I always thought that it still had that potential.
Yeah, and I think on my side, because similarly being around domestic violence, I just knew I didn't want it to ever get to that point. So we took the trauma differently, where she was expecting it. I never wanted to give it because I know we both know what it looks like on the opposite side to see it happening, and then just knowing, okay, this is not something I would ever want to do or ever even want to be in the same room ever again to see it happen again.
While being aware of the trauma that you each experienced, you were able to not act on it or not react on it. And so that kind of
Right.
comes back to the question of like, how do you know if you're acting out of trauma?
So where do we bring in this dance therapy?
I would start with saying most people who have experienced trauma, whether they're aware of it or not, and I would just say even most people in general are pretty disconnected from their bodies. Especially if you've had trauma, that is a very wise trauma response. If you experienced emotional or physical or both abuse in those ways, our bodies are smart in the sense that they'll dissociate or disconnect so that we don't have to feel as much pain. And this shows up in a number of ways today. Like maybe you're on social media more than you'd like to be, or you're over analyzing what people are doing. Maybe it's your partner, maybe it's someone else. You're in your head a lot instead of being in your body. So that is one of the foundations that I start with, is connecting back to your body in a way that's safe. When people have an association of being connected to their bodies with fear and trauma, and when they've blocked out sensations from their body to protect themselves from feeling it or really connecting to any memory of trauma, it's important that they connect back in. So it looks really simple at first. It's just like me guiding them to move their bodies and moving with them to move their bodies in. For example, I do a trauma-informed kink workshop in New York for a poly and kink community. And one of the first things that I do is just have them move their bodies intuitively in a way that feels pleasurable, that feels indulgent, that just feels quote unquote good to them. Because I'm trying to help them understand how they can feel pleasure in their bodies first, independently of anyone else. And when that happens, there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes up, whether it's like, I'm not allowed to feel good, or if I feel good and I drop my guard, something bad's going to happen, or I shouldn't be, moving my hips like that for whatever reason, whatever messages they were taught when they were younger. They may have an instinct to, I feel like this happens a lot where in my workshops, they have an instinct to, I don't know, go upside down or do something wild. It's not really that wild, but to them it feels really wild. And it's like, I'm not allowed, or they're afraid of judgment. And so when we connect to our bodies, that a lot of that stuff comes rushing in, and it serves to disconnect from their bodies again, unless they have a guide where it's like, no, you can keep connecting and move through those fears that are coming up. And on an even deeper level, they start to connect to those sensations that are tied, or that are the memories of their trauma. And I don't know, I just went on a tangent about where dance therapy comes in.
Listen, we're just letting you go.
Right. It's also part of it where it's like, if your body has been tense for the last 30, 40 years, and not just because, you're at a computer all day, although that doesn't help, but because you're like, people who are holding trauma in their bodies are like literally holding on to protect themselves. Just like you mentioned, Reese, like, not saying that you were doing this, but I know when I was in fear of people judging me or attacking me, I would just kind of brace and be on the defense. And so I also help people literally in their bodies learn how to soften or learn how to be more assertive. Like I told you about that client who we were moving power, and she never felt safe to move power because that meant she had to save a life until we released that memory. And so literally teaching their bodies ways of moving and being that is a lot more functional and healthy for themselves and for their relationships.
So we come to this point because you sent me an email, but around that time, because you sent me an email and I didn't see it till maybe like a month or two later. But around that time when I actually opened your email, I was looking for information on how trauma affects relationships and intimacy.
Wow.
And because I feel so tight and guarded and like it's hard for me, and I use the word ground to ground myself, to be in my feelings, to relax, to let go, to get out of my head. Those things are so hard for me. Um so I was looking for things and trying. I'm a human services major as well in school. So I was just looking for articles to read, videos to watch, and just information. And maybe like a week or two after I was looking into that, I opened your email.
That's wild. Oh
And
my
I'm
God.
like, trauma in relationships. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I've literally just been looking for all this stuff and specifically trying to relate movement to it. Because, like I said, like, I feel like just stiff and guarded a lot of times. Like, I'm not someone who just, I feel like I don't flow. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of anxiety and distrust and stuff just throughout my day, the way that I move. And it's just hard to deal with. And it's something that, I've been so interested in learning more about. I've also been reading about the chakras and stored trauma and stuff like that. So like the timing of all this just seemed perfect.
Wow. That
Like
does
I
seem
know it was a
perfect.
little off with, but just learning about it. If someone was interested in just taking step one, as far as, okay, how do I start moving? Who do I look up? Where do I go? Just anything. Like, what would you advise?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it depends on what step one you're ready for. Like, if you want to read more about it, um, a popular book that people find really helpful is "The Body Keeps the Score." That's less about movement and more showing the science of how trauma is stored in the body, but it's very, very helpful as an introductory material. There is also a theory or perspective that I work from is Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. And you can get real deep into the science of that. I don't think that's necessarily necessary, although some people love that. But more so how he describes how social engagement, we have a social engagement system, and there are ways where, if we make certain eye contact or use certain voices or tones of voice, if we play more with people, or say our relationships, he kind of just distinguishes things that we can do to strengthen our vagus nerve, which would essentially allow us to respond in a more calm way or in a more grounded way, to use your word. So those are two main people that I really follow. And then in terms of movement, so if you want to stop reading about stuff, because I know some people come to me, they're like, I've read all the books, I've listened to all the podcasts, I've done all the affirmation, I'm done using my head. I have a lot of free movement based meditations on Insight Timer, which is a meditation app. And I also have a couple of courses on there that if you have an Insight Timer subscription, they're free. And if you don't, I think you can still try it for free for 7 days, like if you didn't want to pay for it. But that's kind of where I've shifted what I put out in the world. Like I do provide some psychoeducation and all of those resources, but I like to get people straight to the movement if they're ready for it. Like feel into your body, what sensation, when you were just talking about your, what you shared with me, which I really appreciate how vulnerably and openly you just shared that. In my head, I had this instinct to ask you, and I don't know if you're up for this, you don't actually have to do it, but if you'd like to, you can. But if you were to envision yourself, like if you were to see yourself in your mind's eye, the version of you that you want to be, I think you mentioned flow, right? Open, all those things. Like how would you be holding your body differently? How would you move about, from room to room, or how would you walk into a room? How would you move with Joe differently if it was different?
Yes.
Just lighter. Sometimes I feel heavy and slow. Literally like physically slow. Like I feel like I move sometimes like I have pain.
Yeah, I mean, it
Like
sounds like you're like,
it
even that, I'm like, it sounds like you're carrying a lot.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you have like an image of, or even an image of what your body might look like in terms of position or movement? It could even be down as simple as, the way you would walk on the street or from your
I'm
office
so
to your bathroom.
I'm so used to the way that I walk that I can't envision me walking any other way, but maybe just less. I don't know. I just have a feeling of just lighter, less um more freer movement, less structure.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense.
Just hearing that feels like I can breathe more, like there's more room to breathe.
All right. Do you find that trauma when it comes to the sex of a person is carried differently, or do you feel like because as a man, I'm just kind of questioning like things happen to me and traumatic things happen, but as a man, I'm constantly saying, "All right, man up and move on," or even stuff in my past. I'm like, okay, the past is the past, and I it happened and move forward. Do you find that from the perspective of your men that are in your clientele that they have maybe a different voice because coming into this idea of talking about therapy and traumatic therapy and somatic therapy and things of that nature, I immediately went to, okay, is this something for a man, in a respectful way, or is this more geared towards, a softness of things and that maybe I didn't equate myself to?
Hmm. Great question. Yeah, I work with couples too, and a lot of them hetero couples, and so I work with men and women in the same room. And I do find a lot of times there are patterns where, for example, one couple that I worked with recently, we were exploring anger and how they each express their anger. The female had the idea or this belief that he always expressed anger and she didn't. And so she was scared of this, of his anger. And when I had them move their anger, I was just kind of like, don't think too much about it. But if you could put your, you know, your expressions of anger kind of in a dance back and forth with each other. Just go with it. Just do what your body wants to do. And his movements were more direct. It's like a slash, not quite a punch, but slash or forceful or strong. And hers were chaotic and all over the place. So they weren't quite, I'm directly moving towards you and,
Right.
that feeling of aggression, but it was just like chaos.
Yeah.
And it just kind of showed them in a really quick way, kind of shattered her belief in realizing that it's not that she doesn't get angry. It's just that his anger looks more like male typical anger, I guess we can say. And hers was, which I find in, a lot of women that I work with, it's like they're afraid to be direct. And so instead of direct movements, they're like all over the place, but they're still angry. Maybe they just don't connect with it in the same way or express it as directly as a man might.
There's oftentimes I'll when we're having a disagreement or something of that nature, where I'm like, just tell me what the problem is. Like,
I think I have more direct anger and you have more indirect anger.
because here's the thing. Like in the real world, is like for me, I can get over something relatively fast, where I don't store it, I don't hold it. Like if we have a disagreement or we have a something that just doesn't vibe right, okay. Have we fixed it and can we move forward? Where sometimes I feel like you'll
Yeah.
hold it a little bit longer, and it's like, oh, we're still on this.
I need a debriefing for a situation.
Got to let it go.
Well, we consciously let it go together. We don't just forget about it and assume that it's done and then come back and act like normal.
I think I like. Here's the problem. Here's the solution.
Yeah,
Next.
it's like more left brain. I think men are more typically in their left side of the brains, which is the analytical, like logical. Okay, this is problem A. Here's a solution, and and
Right.
us women tend to that movement that I was talking about, the indirect movement, is very reflective. Like, well, what if this was possible, and what about this thing? And we just kind of pick from all around before we come to a direct action. And when working with a couple, it's like, how do we understand our body language and our movement expressions in a way where we don't make assumptions about it or misinterpret them? Or it's like, if you're more direct, it doesn't mean you're more angry or like you're gonna attack me. It's just that's the way. And when we understand our movement repertoires better, especially in relationships.
You mentioned that you have a small child. What are some things that you're incorporating raising a child that is going to maybe instill or help the future, maybe adjust differently to some trauma that could happen, or is there something that you can give some advice to some people that we are, follow us and follow you, that says, okay, with children, here's some things that maybe you should try to do, or here's some things that you're implementing in your life.
I wish we danced more with our kids.
Yeah.
Or had our kids.
You can start now.
They're
adults.
I mean, still.
Yeah, you're right.
That's a great question. And you just saying that, Reese, like we should dance more. It's like if you did start to dance more now, you would inevitably be like, look different as a role model in that way of like, oh, like it's okay to just, know.
Don't talk about it, be about it.
What's that?
Said, don't talk about it, be about it.
Be about it. Right.
I think that dancing, if we did dance with, like, just to make sure they were confident and comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah. I mean, so many people are afraid of dancing, not even so also just to be clear, is dance therapy. It's not even, there's no technical or structural dance to it. It's very organic. And how does your body want to move right now in a way where you authentically are expressing yourself or your emotions? But when I start to work with people in groups specifically, like I love doing group work. I run group retreats, and that's just kind of like throwing people in kind of really quickly. So when I do my retreats and we're suddenly mirroring each other, people are so afraid of judgment. Like, is it okay to to move this way? Am I going to get judged? And there's just so much shame that comes up. So I do think showing kids from a young age that like, just move your body how you want. When I became a mom, and for probably the first year and a half at least, I realized how uncomfortable I was with my child's emotions. Like, his crying, whining. It's still, his whining is still really annoying as a toddler, but just crying or being frustrated and these intense emotions, I was not comfortable with it, and I wanted it to stop, which is natural in a sense, right? Like, you don't want your child to feel bad. But at some point I realized, and because it made me angry and it made me sad, and I realized, what am I doing right now? I'm showing my kid that it's not okay to feel. And he's a boy as far as he identifies so far. And like you said, Joe, a lot of males are taught that emotions aren't okay and to just kind of like, suck it up and move on. And
Right.
I think I'm raising him pretty differently. I know I'm raising him very differently than my parents raised my brothers, because when I finally realized that, I started to just be like, it's okay that you're feeling sad. And what do you want? If I was using more of adult language, I'd be like, what does your body want right now? But I'd be like, what do you want? Do you want a hug? Do you want to do this or that? And I kind of in some way try to ask what his body needs. And I purposely, usually he wants a hug, so I purposely just mold my body to his, which is an embodied form of attunement. So I'm trying to let him know in all ways, words, verbally and non-verbally, that it's okay to feel.
Once I can keep going. So once you do therapy, and once you've kind of gotten to a pattern of corrected actions and really just kind of getting to the flow, is it a lifelong journey of this, or is it okay, I'm healed and the trauma's gone, or is it not? What's the path? I'm healed now, I feel better, I've sat with Orit and we had a great opportunity and we've done this for a few months or maybe even a year or two. What's next?
Wait, before, I feel like it's ongoing, because I feel like I'm constantly storing trauma from him.
Wait a minute.
like our little disagreements, I feel like we get on each other's nerves, and like I feel like that is probably, I'm not going to call it trauma, but
It's not trauma.
I feel like it's stored.
I don't want anybody to think I'm traumatic. I'm not a trauma giver.
I feel like it's stored, and I rarely release physically. So I feel like that is going to be,
You gotta go to boxing.
The answer is going to
something.
be on boxing.
Like, get it out.
Aggressively?
I mean, if you got to feel it, or flow naturally.
I don't know. What's the answer?
Well, so I think, you can be healed in the sense that you've healed past trauma, and like you've released certain memories that are weighing down on you and impacting your body and nervous system in a really difficult or detrimental way. But like you were saying, Reese, we experience new traumas, as we go through life. So when you have regulated your nervous system and you've expanded your window of tolerance, which is really that calm, cool place in your nervous system that allows you to not get triggered as easily or impulsively or as quickly, you can navigate new traumas or issues in a much more graceful, calm way. And that is the ongoing work. It's just deepening, like, especially if you're non-monogamous, then yeah, it's an ongoing journey. I don't think it ever stops, but you get through it faster. You're more like, you're not as much on a roller coaster. The ups aren't as up and the downs aren't as down. You're just like grounded and regulated, and you feel normal emotions of sadness and fear and all that stuff, but it doesn't take you and have a debilitating impact like crippling anxiety would when someone hasn't really healed from their body.
I think it's more like stressors than trauma. as you're going through life and you're going through your relationship. They're more
Right.
like stressors than the bigger traumas.
You can't hide much in a non-monogamous relationship anymore. Like it's it's easy to kind of front on one person, but when there's multiple people involved, the masks fall very easily, and your true self shows almost immediately. And I had to learn the same thing you were just mentioning, of just, okay, this other person doesn't know me as well as my partner Reese does, and who am I showing this person who I am? And then it comes to find out, well, this isn't really me. And so once the real me comes out, it's like, oh, okay. And then just hearing her say the word stressors, I think that the idea is like, I can poke the bear in the same way with her as well as other people, because it's just, those are the things that I deal with. And I guess there's small releases of trauma. And I'm like, okay, well, let me, there's oftentimes I would say, there's a thing that she hates that I say when I'll say it. I say, we haven't had an argument in quite some time. Things are going too good. And then it's literally like the next day, right? It comes out. And so there's oftentimes that, I'm a stress giver sometimes. I
Wait,
gotta
so
get
why do
better at it.
you do that?
I like a little passion. I like a little bit of
Attention.
right. I mean, I'm with someone who is more of an introverted person. And I'm an extroverted person. So if I'm out and loud and boisterous and causing a ruckus, and my partner is kind of in the corner chilling, I'm pulling you out to the dance floor.
Yeah.
Literally.
And I have the ability to disassociate from anything, including him. And that's tough, because sometimes I disassociate and I don't, as easy as it is to pull back, it's not as easy to bring myself back in. When we're having issues, I can completely shut down.
Yeah, because I think it comes back to like where we said earlier, we're gonna have a disagreement, and then within me for 5 minutes later, I'm like, all right, you hungry? Let's get a bite to eat. Let's connect. Where I have to, there's times I've learned, okay, well, the connect could be separate, as crazy as it sounds, but we can connect on a via a text, or we can connect via a DoorDash, or we can connect via, and I had to learn those things of, okay, whatever she's going through now, me being maybe physically present isn't necessarily the best idea, but maybe just being, in arm's reach or a text away or something like that. It's just learning the triggers of the partnerships, especially in monogamy, and now not being monogamous at this point, to just really say, okay, what does it feel like here? What does it feel like over there? And then sometimes, if I don't know if you experience it, but sometimes you can be in a relationship with multiple people and they're both not feeling you. And you just,
What does it feel like by yourself?
I'm like, I'm in a relationship with multiple people and I don't have anybody right now.
Yeah.
I feel like we could keep going with this, but I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Yeah.
But I love this conversation. I love the topic. I feel like I relate to it so much, and I still have so much digging and, learning and then applying for myself. But is there anything else you want to say to our listeners before we conclude?
Well, I also want to say that I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I feel like if you're both up for it, at some point we could do another episode where it's a bit more movement based, if you want to be
love to
the role models and try some stuff out. I think that would be a really cool deeper dive.
I have the biggest anxiety when it comes to dancing.
Well, I think you keep going into an idea of dance, and it's not dance.
I know
it's
it's not
movement.
dancing, but
so I think you have to be clear that no one's asking you to do the foxtrot in the middle of a room of 1,000 people.
No.
But it's saying being present with just yourself, to allow yourself to actually just have movement, and maybe being able to express what the heaviness feels like in the form of a movement.
That, yeah.
And then making
Same
it lighter
thing.
in a way that feels
No.
good for you.
Right.
Yeah.
He
But
didn't
we
make it
don't
sound
even
better.
have to go that deep. It could just be more like you two interacting and Yeah, I've done that on podcasts before where even just a minute is very, very revealing and also not as scary as it might seem. But anyway, you
will
don't have
do
to
that
say
then.
any answer now. I just thought I might propose that. And I also
I'll say yes to
appreciate you
everything.
saying that it makes you anxious, because that comes up for for almost everybody who tries this work, and it's normal. It's your body just being like, oh no, there's something, I might feel something that that is hard, and your body is letting you know that.
Is there something that you do every day consistently that maybe you can share with us that we can maybe start to just simply take in one thing from this on a physical level that we can all try?
Sure. Yeah. And that answer is it's something that you would come up with in your body. So something that I like to do with everybody that I'm working with is I have them come up with a safety movement. So this is a movement. I'll just guide you for a moment. If you just take a deep breath in and breathe out, and then take another deep breath in. And then on the out breath, allow your body just to come into a very simple pose or movement that feels comforting to you right now. Don't think about it too much. Just let it happen.
It requires thought.
You're messing up my flow.
I'm sorry.
It could literally be like leaning back more into your chair. Yeah, like Joe is. Or maybe you notice you put your hand on your lap.
Right.
Or, holding yourself. So I have a very short guided audio to do that if you want to share the link, and not do it on camera, and if other people want to try it. But I mean, I find myself doing this stuff naturally all day, every day, where if I'm feeling a little anxious, I just like, oh, my hand's on my heart and that feels nice. Or, I'm disconnected from myself. So I'm like touching my cheek. And I mean, at this point, I don't think about it anymore. It just happens. But if that's something you want to take away, is like, keep asking your body, how might I feel most supported right now? And how can I feel even more supported in this moment? You could lie down. People resist lying down so much. And then when they do, they're like, oh, I needed this. Like, I needed to surrender. Even just for a minute. Doesn't mean you're going to nap through your whole workday, but.
Thank you, Ori, for this wonderful conversation.
Of course.
How do we reach you?
Yes, I'll do that quickly because I hear my child tantruming and coming up the stairs. My website is oritkrug.com. That's my full name.com. I don't know if you can hear him. And I have everything on there. People talking about this work. I have my retreats on there. I'm doing a poly couples retreat in Costa Rica this April. Doing a lot of the work that we've just talked about. Check it out. It's going to be amazing. It's an all-inclusive, very intimate, small gathering. And I have other retreats on there too. And my movement-based meditations, my free ones, and my low-cost courses are also linked on there if you want to just dip your toe.
Definitely.
Nice. Did you say April for the retreat?
I did, like 6 months from now.
That sounds like a birthday gift.
Wow. On that note, thanks for stopping and giving us an opportunity. Thank you for your time. Seriously, we do appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Yes.
And we do want to actually come back and do some opportunity to learn from this and really grow from this. So I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
From us.
Let's keep in touch.
We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for also doing this amazing podcast and helping people and inspiring people and just being real about all of it.
Thank you.
It's needed.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe.
And connect with us on social media. You can find our links in the description.